The klaxons blared in a steady, mechanical rhythm that cut through the calm of the USS Vanguard. On the bridge, Captain Lila Doone stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse of space displayed on the viewport. A fleet of Vashik warships had just entered Typhon's orbit. The coordinates were precise. The ultimatum was clear. "Captain, we're reading over 30 Vashik ships, all in attack formation," reported Commander Jarvis, the ship's tactical officer. His voice was clipped, a trained calmness beneath the weight of their impending doom. Lila took a slow breath, her thoughts razor-sharp. The Vashik had been hovering on the edge for months, testing humanity's defenses, watching, waiting. Now, the time had come for them to make their move. She knew the moment they made their intentions clear, Typhon would be a battleground. She had seen war before, too many times, but this was different. This was her home. "How long until they reach Typhon?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot of tension in her stomach. 20 minutes, Captain," Jarvis replied. Lila nodded. "Relay a message to all fleets in the sector. This is no longer a negotiation. It's a fight for our survival." Her tone brooked no argument. The Vanguard was humanity's best hope, its last hope. She turned toward the communications officer, Lieutenant Kolra. "Open a secure channel to General Trax. I want him to hear this directly from me." Kolra's fingers flew over the console, and within seconds, a stern, reptilian face appeared on the main screen. General Trax's cold yellow eyes locked with Lila's. "Captain Doone," Trax said, his voice smooth and dripping with menace, "I trust the threat of annihilation has been made clear?" Lila didn't flinch. "Your ultimatum is received. But let me make this clear. Humanity doesn't submit. Not to you, and not to anyone." Trax's lips curled into a smile, sharp and predatory. "Your planet will burn, as will all your colonies. The galaxy will be mine. Resistance is futile." "Then prepare to be disappointed," Lila responded, her voice cutting through the screen like a blade. Before Trax could reply, Lila cut the communication. The bridge fell silent for a long moment. Every officer, every crew member, knew what this meant. She turned to face her crew, every eye locked on her, waiting for the word. "We've been here before," she began, her voice steady but fierce. "We've fought and won battles against enemies who thought they could crush us. But this time, it's different. This time, we fight for our families. For Typhon. For humanity itself." She paused, letting her words sink in. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for something far more important, freedom. And freedom meant everything. "We've got 20 minutes until they hit Typhon," she continued, her gaze sweeping over her senior officers. "Commander Jarvis, prepare our fighters for immediate launch. Get the Vanguard into battle formation. We'll hit them hard before they land." "Yes, Captain," Jarvis replied, his fingers already flying over his console to coordinate with the fighter wing. "Lieutenant Kolra, I want you to contact Typhon's defense fleet," Lila ordered, turning to the communications officer. "Tell them to deploy every ship in orbit and prepare for the worst. We need every ounce of firepower." "Understood, Captain." She nodded, eyes steely, heart racing. The Vashik were an advanced species, and their warships were formidable. But humanity had something the Vashik couldn't measure or replicate: tenacity. They could bend, but they never broke. "We won't just fight them off," Lila said, her voice rising with authority. "We'll make sure they remember the day they tried to take our planet." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, an unspoken promise. She could see the determination in her crew's eyes, feel it in the tension of the room. They were ready to fight, ready to protect what was theirs. As the seconds ticked down, Lila moved to the command chair, strapping herself in. She was the rock her crew needed her to be. There was no turning back now. "Commander, how long until we're in firing range?" she asked. 15 minutes, Jarvis responded, his voice cool, but with the same edge of urgency that rippled through the crew. "Good. I want every last fighter launched the second we're in range." We'll soften them up with our standard tactics, but I need something more. Something unexpected. I want to hit them where they don't expect. Jarvis raised an eyebrow. You're talking about using the Vanguard's auxiliary weapon systems? Lila's lips twitched in a tight smile. Exactly. It was a risk, but it was their best shot. The Vanguard had secondary weaponry, ancient tech they had scavenged from ruins on Typhon, but its true power lay in its unpredictability. They hadn't used it in years, but now, it was the only weapon they had that could catch the Vashik off guard. They might be technologically superior, but they weren't invincible. Every race had weaknesses. Lila intended to exploit theirs. The countdown clock on the bridge ticked down, and with it, the tension in the room grew thick, palpable. Outside the window, the Vashik ships loomed larger. Their arrival was no longer a matter of if, it was a matter of when. Captain, Jarvis said, voice strained, we're not going to be able to hold them off with just the Vanguard. We need reinforcements. Lila didn't hesitate. Contact every ally we have. The call goes out now. If they're as committed to freedom as we are, they'll come. If not, we fight alone. The bridge crew nodded in agreement, each of them understanding the stakes. There was no room for doubt, no time for second-guessing. They either stood together, or they fell together. Lila took a breath, preparing herself for the battle ahead. She'd fought wars, seen friends fall, and stared down enemies more powerful than herself. But Typhon, this was personal. The humans were no longer just defending a colony. They were defending their right to exist. She looked to Jarvis one last time. Get us ready. Aye, Captain, he said. And with that, the ship began its final preparations. As the Vanguard slowly powered up its weapons systems, Lila felt the familiar heat of determination course through her veins. She had no illusions about what lay ahead. They might not win this battle, but the Vashik would learn, without a doubt, that humanity could, and would, fight back. And this time, they wouldn't be asking for help. The cold metallic hum of the USS Vanguard filled the silence on the bridge. Lila Doone stood by the viewport, her eyes narrowing as she watched the Vashik warships orbit Typhon. The fleet was almost in position. Any minute now, they would begin their descent. The countdown had begun. But just as her hand reached for the comms panel, a sharp tone rang through the bridge, an alert. Something wasn't right. Captain, Jarvis said, his voice tight. We've detected a breach in our internal security system. Someone's feeding data to the Vashik. Lila's heart skipped a beat. How? We're not sure yet, Jarvis replied, working furiously at his console. It's like they've bypassed the encryption protocols. Whoever it is, they've got access to everything. Lila turned toward the tactical officer, her face hardening. Find them. Now. The crew moved quickly, but Lila's mind raced in a different direction. A mole. It had to be one of them, one of her own. This wasn't just sabotage, this was a betrayal. The Vashik had somehow infiltrated their systems. She couldn't afford to waste time. Every second counted. Cora, open a secure line to Typhon's defense fleet. We need to stall the Vashik. Can you manage that? Lieutenant Cora didn't hesitate. I'm on it, Captain. Lila's pulse quickened as she glanced at the countdown clock. The Vashik were already positioning themselves above Typhon's atmosphere. Typhon's defenses were strong, but they were vastly outnumbered. She needed her full crew, and she needed them to be loyal. If someone was leaking their plans to the enemy. Jarvis, how long until we can pinpoint the source of the breach? Lila asked, turning back to him. A few minutes at most, he replied, not looking up from his console. His fingers danced over the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. I'm tracking the signal now. It's a ghost. They're covering their tracks. Lila clenched her fists. Every fiber of her being wanted to scream. How could this happen? She trusted her people. She had to. We'll sort this out later, she said, trying to keep her composure. Right now, we fight. She turned to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Ryle. Ryle, I need every fighter launched. Deploy them immediately. Use evasive maneuvers. We hit the Vashik hard, keep them off balance. Aye, Captain, Ryle responded, voice steady as always. But she could hear the strain in it now. It wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for their very existence. Lila's gut told her that the Vashik weren't the only threat they had to worry about. Minutes passed. Every second felt like an eternity. Jarvis finally looked up, his face ashen. It's Lieutenant Turner, he said, voice grim. Lila's eyes narrowed. Turner was a senior officer, someone she had trusted implicitly. How could he? She couldn't believe it. What's his involvement? He's been sending encrypted data to the Vashik, Jarvis reported, the disgust in his voice clear. All our troop movements, fighter plans, the locations of our defenses, he's been sending everything. Lila felt the ground beneath her feet shift. Betrayal. It always hit hardest from those closest to you. She turned sharply to Ryle. Track his location. Ryle quickly activated the ship's internal surveillance systems. He's in the lower decks, Captain. We're locking down the area now. Lila exhaled, her anger giving way to a cold focus. There would be no mercy. Turner had crossed a line, and he would pay the price for it. In a matter of moments, the security team apprehended Lieutenant Turner in the cargo bay. Lila stormed down to meet them, her jaw clenched, eyes fixed ahead. When she arrived, Turner was kneeling on the cold metal floor, his hands bound behind his back. His once confident posture was gone, replaced by a quiet, defeated resignation. Turner, Lila said, her voice low and controlled. What the hell were you thinking? He didn't meet her gaze. Instead, his eyes flickered nervously, focused on the floor. I didn't have a choice, he muttered, his voice shaky. The Vashik promised. Promised what? Lila snapped. Your life? Your survival? What did they promise, Turner? They promised the future, he whispered, eyes darting up to hers. Humanity was never meant to survive. You are too stubborn to see that. The Vashik will wipe us out, Captain. They're too powerful. I only did what was necessary. Lila's fist slammed into the wall next to him, a hard, resonant crack that echoed through the bay. The action sent a wave of shock through the room, but Turner didn't flinch. They will not win, Lila growled, her voice low and lethal. We fight. No matter the cost. That is humanity's way. And you, she paused, her rage simmering just beneath the surface. You made a choice, Turner. And now, you will face the consequences of that choice. Turner didn't respond. His expression was one of hollow resignation. Lila's gaze remained cold and unyielding. Put him in the brig, she ordered. Back on the bridge, the air was tense. Lila felt a gnawing unease gnaw at her. She had lost trust in one of her own. How many others might be in on this? She couldn't afford to doubt now, not when the Vashik were already on their doorstep. Typhon was waiting for reinforcements, but time was running out. Captain, Jarvis called out, his voice tense. We've intercepted another message from the Vashik. It's not a transmission we can ignore. Lila didn't wait for him to elaborate. She strode over to the console. The screen flickered before displaying a live video feed of General Trax's cold, predatory smile. Captain Dune, Trax's voice echoed across the room, the malice unmistakable. You are too late. Your planet is already lost. Surrender now, and we may spare the remnants of your people. Lila's heart pounded in her chest. His arrogance was palpable, and the threat in his words was chilling. But she held her ground. We don't surrender, she said, her voice unwavering. If you think you've won, you're about to find out how wrong you are. The Vashik leader's smile deepened, and then the transmission cut off abruptly. We'll see, Lila whispered to herself, gripping the armrests of her chair. We'll see. She stood alone in her thoughts, the weight of responsibility crushing, But she wasn't about to let this betrayal, or the Vashik, break her. She was going to win. Or die trying. The USS Vanguard was a silent predator now, its engines humming with a barely contained power, the pulse of its weapon systems building to a crescendo. Lila Doone stood before the tactical display, her fingers curled into fists at her sides. The Vashik fleet was still there, hanging above Typhon's orbit like a deadly storm cloud, only now they knew what they were up against. They could sense the determination in the crew, could feel the cold steel of humanity's resolve sharpening, even in the face of overwhelming odds. All fighters launched, Captain. They're in position, Commander Ryle reported, his voice steady but taut with urgency. We're ready. Lila nodded, the tension on her face softening just a fraction. Good. We hit them fast. Hit them hard. No second chances. Understood, Captain, Ryle said, turning back to his console. Lila glanced at the crew. Her bridge officers, once a collection of individuals with their own ambitions and fears, were now united under one singular cause, the defense of Typhon. A human colony was one thing. But Typhon? Typhon was home. She could hear the distant rumble of fighter engines through the hull as they launched, each one cutting through the silence like a bullet leaving a chamber. Out there, beyond the Vanguard, the first wave of human fighters engaged the Vashik warships, laser cannons firing in brilliant streaks of light, cutting through the black void. But even as the battle raged outside, Lila's mind kept returning to Turner. The traitor. His face haunted her thoughts. A mole, sabotaging them from within, feeding the Vashik information, had almost cost them everything. The thought of how close they had come to losing Typhon, and possibly the war, made her stomach turn. Captain, Jarvis said, breaking her reverie, we've intercepted another transmission from the Vashik. They've initiated orbital bombardment. Typhon's surface defenses are taking a beating. We need to act now. Lila didn't waste a moment. Target their lead ship, the one closest to the planet. Full weapons. Hit them with everything we've got. Aye, Captain. Jarvis's fingers flew across his console. The Vanguard shuddered as the first barrage of missiles launched, streaking across the blackness toward the Vashik flagship. The bridge crew braced, anticipating the impact. The impact came seconds later, a violent explosion that lit up the space in front of them. The Vashik ship staggered, rocked by the force of the blow, but it didn't go down. The Vashik were tough, and they wouldn't fall easily. Commander Ryle, Lila ordered, her voice tight, get those fighters back in position. We need another wave. We'll hit them with a two-pronged attack, force them to divide their attention. Ryle nodded, his eyes already scanning the battle reports. Yes, Captain. The battle unfolded like a deadly dance. Human fighters darted in and out of the Vashik fleet, blasting away shields, striking at weak points, drawing fire to keep the larger ships distracted. The Vanguard herself was locked in a deadly exchange with the Vashik flagship, missiles and laser fire illuminating the dark expanse. But with each passing moment, it became clear, this wasn't enough. They were holding their own, but the Vashik were relentless. Lila had no illusion that they would win the battle with their current strategy. They needed a game-changer. And she had just the thing. Jarvis, she said, her voice calm but forceful, prepare the auxiliary weapon systems. It's time. Jarvis's eyes widened as he processed the order. Captain, those systems haven't been fully calibrated in years. They're a last resort. I know, Lila interrupted. But right now, we don't have a choice. The auxiliary weapons were old, scavenged from abandoned technology left behind after the war with the Zarthian Confederacy. Their power was unpredictable, but they were powerful. And it was their only shot at breaking the Vashik's grip on Typhon. Deploy them, she said, locking eyes with Jarvis. Now. The Vanguard shuddered as the auxiliary weapons powered up, their ancient systems coming to life with a low, grinding hum. On the display screens, Lila could see the energy levels rising, the buildup of raw, unstable power. This could either save us or destroy us, Jarvis muttered, his fingers hovering over the launch controls. Lila's mind raced. She couldn't afford hesitation. Fire. With a violent flare, the Vanguard unleashed a barrage of energy pulses from its auxiliary cannons. The beams streaked out into space, tearing through the dark void, slicing through the Vashik fleet with unimaginable force. A ripple of chaos spread across the enemy ships as shields faltered and warships exploded in violent bursts of fire. For a moment, the tide seemed to turn. The Vashik flagship, already damaged from earlier attacks, now staggered under the sustained fire from the Vanguard. Its shield shattered. Its weapons flared out in erratic arcs. But just as victory seemed within reach, something went terribly wrong. Lila's heart stopped as the alert on her console flared, critical system failure in the auxiliary weapon array. Self-destruct imminent. Jarvis! Lila shouted, her voice frantic. What's happening? We're overloading the systems, Jarvis responded quickly, his face pale. The auxiliary weapons were never meant to be used like this. They're going to. Before he could finish, the ship shuddered violently, and the warning lights on the bridge flashed. The auxiliary weapons core was unstable, and the Vanguard was caught in the blast radius. Ryle! Lila barked, her voice sharp. Get us out of here, now! The ship lurched, the gravity shifting momentarily as Ryle fought to bring the Vanguard into a controlled maneuver, pulling them away from the epicenter of the explosion. There was a deafening roar as the weapon systems detonated, and for a heartbeat, Lila thought they had lost everything. The shockwave from the blast tore through space, sending debris scattering in all directions. The Vashik flagship, already on the brink of destruction, was obliterated. But they had paid a heavy price. The Vanguard was rocked, her systems down to emergency power. The bridge lights flickered, casting an eerie, strobe-like glow across the crew. Lila felt the bitter taste of fear rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. They were alive. They were still in the fight. And Typhon had a chance. Report, Lila demanded, though she feared she already knew the answer. We're damaged, Jarvis confirmed, his fingers tapping frantically at his console. Weapons offline. Shields are at 30%. We're barely holding together. But even as the words left his mouth, the screen in front of Lila lit up. Typhon's defense fleet had arrived, at the last possible moment. Dozens of ships, outnumbering the remaining Vashik warships, surged into the system, firing everything they had. Lila allowed herself a moment of relief. They might not have won the battle yet, but the tide had turned. The Vashik were beaten. The humans had endured. Prepare for counterattack, Lila said, her voice cold but triumphant. And this time, we finish it. Typhon was saved. For now. But Lila knew better than anyone, the fight was far from over.